The metal doors of the space station slid open with a soft hiss. 12 alien students stepped through, their various forms creating strange shadows under the bright lights. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated in clear containers filled with blue liquid. A few had crystal-like skin that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. Zixto moved carefully on her 6 thin legs. Her homeworld of Vector never changed temperature. Every day was exactly the same. The air never moved. The ground never shook. Here on the station, she could feel tiny vibrations through the floor that made her nervous. Her crystal body clicked. Softly as she walked beside her, Morphic swam in his portable water tank. His world was all ocean, warm and calm. The strongest current was gentler than a human's breath. His large eyes looked around at the hard metal walls. Everything here seemed so solid and sharp. On his world, everything was soft and flowing. The other students were just as uncomfortable. They came from worlds where nothing ever changed. No storms, no earthquakes, no wild animals. Their planets were safe and predictable. They had studied in schools where the biggest excitement was a new book arriving. Jake Martinez walked toward them with a smile. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and kind eyes. He wore simple clothes, blue pants, and a white shirt. Nothing fancy. Nothing that showed he was important. The alien students found this strange. On their worlds, teachers and guides wore special robes and followed strict rules. "Welcome to Earth Station," Jake said in a warm voice. "I'm your guide for the next 2 weeks. Ready to see what our little planet has to offer?" The students looked at each other nervously. They had read about Earth in their textbooks. It was listed as a Class 12 Deathworld, but their teachers said this was probably a mistake in the files. How dangerous could one small planet be? Quilron spoke first through his translation device. His species communicated with flashing lights on their heads, but the device changed this into words. "Professor Martinez, we have studied your planet's basic information. The classification seems incorrect. Surely a world that supports billions of life forms cannot be truly dangerous." Jake's smile got bigger. "Oh, you'll see. We're going to start with some easy stuff. Just everyday things that humans do. Nothing too exciting." The way he said easy made several students worried. On their worlds, easy meant sitting quietly and thinking. It meant reading books or solving math problems. What did easy mean to a species from a death world? They boarded the shuttle that would take them to Earth's surface. Jake checked their safety belts and made sure everyone was comfortable. "First time visiting a planet with an atmosphere?" he asked. Most of the students nodded. Their home worlds were either enclosed in protective domes or had atmospheres so thin that nothing could disturb them. "Well, you're in for a treat," Jake said as he sat down. "Earth's got a thick atmosphere, really thick. It protects us from space radiation and keeps our planet warm. But it makes for a bumpy ride going down." The shuttle engines started. The students felt vibrations they had never experienced before. On their worlds, transportation was smooth and silent. This machine shook and roared. As they left the station, Jake pointed out the window. "See that blue and white ball down there? That's home." The blue is water, covers about 70% of the surface. The white stuff is clouds. They're made of water too, but floating in the air. Zixto stared at the planet below. All that water moving around freely. On her world, water was kept in careful containers. It never moved unless someone made it move. "The water is not contained?" she asked. "Nope," Jake said cheerfully. "It goes wherever it wants. Sometimes it falls from the sky. Sometimes it rushes down mountains and rivers. Sometimes it crashes against the shore in waves taller than buildings." Several students made worried sounds. Water that moved by itself sounded terrifying. The shuttle hit Earth's atmosphere, and everything changed. The smooth flight became a wild ride. The shuttle shook and bounced. Outside the windows, flames appeared as air friction heated the ships. Whole warning lights flashed, and a human pilot calmly announced that everything was normal. Morphic's water tank sloshed from side to side. He had never felt motion like this. His species evolved in calm seas where the biggest movement was a gentle tide. This violent shaking felt like the end of the world. "Don't worry," Jake said. noticing their fear. This happens every time. Earth's atmosphere is thick and active. Lots of wind currents and temperature changes makes for rough entry, but it's the same system that keeps us safe from cosmic rays and solar flares. Quilran's S-lights flashed frantically. Your planet's atmosphere attacks visiting ships. Not attacks, Jake explained. Just physics. Dense air creates friction. Friction creates heat. It's actually protecting us. Any dangerous space rocks burn up before they hit the ground. Well, most of them do. The students did not find this comforting as they descended. They could see the planet's surface more clearly. Green and brown patches covered the land. White caps of something covered the tops of tall mountains. Everything looked wild and uncontrolled. Those green areas are forests, Jake explained. Millions of plants growing wherever they want. The brown parts are deserts or plains. And those white caps on the mountains? That's frozen water. We call it snow. The plants grow without permission, asked a student whose species carefully planned every garden. Yep, they compete with each other for sunlight and water. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they fight. It's all natural selection at work. The idea of plants fighting shocked the students. On their worlds, all plant life was carefully managed. Every tree and flower grew in assigned spots. The concept of wild, uncontrolled growth seemed chaotic and dangerous. The shuttle landed at a facility in Southern California. As the doors opened, the students got their first taste of Earth air. It moved constantly. They could feel it pushing against their bodies, carrying strange smells and sounds. Jake stepped out first, breathing deeply. Pacific breeze. Love that smell. Salt water, eucalyptus trees, and just a hint of smog from Los Angeles. The students followed carefully. The ground beneath their feet was not perfectly smooth like their home worlds. Small stones and imperfections made walking difficult. The air temperature was different from the shuttle, warmer and more humid, but the most shocking thing was the sky. It was not a solid dome or protective shield. It was open space stretching up forever, with white clouds moving across it like giant floating islands. The sun, a bright yellow star, blazed overhead without any filters or protective screens. The star is exposed, whispered one student. Where is the radiation shielding? Built right into the atmosphere, Jake said proudly. Ozone layer filters out the worst stuff. Magnetic field deflects solar particles. Pretty clever system, really. Took billions of years to develop. The students stood in the open air, feeling wind they had never experienced under a star that could kill them. On a world that seemed determined to challenge everything they knew about safe living conditions, Dot and Jake Martinez, their human guide, stood there smiling like this was the most normal thing in the universe. Come on, he said, picking up his simple backpack. Let's go see the beach. Wait until you guys see what we do for fun around here. The 12 alien students looked at each other with growing concern. They were starting to understand that their textbooks might have been right after all. Earth really was a death world. Dot and the humans who lived here thought it was paradise. The bus ride to Loyola Beach was the student's second shock of the day. Jake sat calmly as the vehicle bounced and swayed along roads that seemed designed to test the limits of engineering. The students gripped their seats as the bus took turns at speeds that would be considered reckless on any civilized world. Roads are never perfectly straight here, Jake explained as they rounded another curve. We build them around hills, rivers, and existing structures. Makes for interesting drives. Zixtel's crystal body chimed nervously with each bump. On Vector, transportation moved in perfectly straight lines on smooth surfaces. Your species accepts this danger for daily travel. Danger? Jake looked confused. This is just normal traffic. Wait until you see the freeway during rush hour. The students decided they did not want to see the freeway during rush hour. When they reached the beach, Jake paid the bus driver and led them down a path toward the ocean. The sound reached them first, a constant roaring that never stopped. It grew louder as they walked, until it became overwhelming. Then they saw it. The Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, a vast expanse of moving water under the open sky. But it was not calm like the water systems on their worlds. Massive waves, taller than most of the students, crashed onto the shore with tremendous force. White foam exploded into the air. The water retreated, then surged forward again, over and over. Without end, Morphic stared from his portable tank. His species had evolved in gentle seas where the biggest wave was smaller than a human hand. These crushing walls of water looked like certain death. How do you survive near this? Survive! Jake kicked off his shoes and rolled up his pants. We don't just survive it, we play in it. Before the horrified students could stop him, Jake walked straight toward the water. A wave rushed up the sand and covered his feet. He laughed as the cold water soaked his legs. Come on in, he called. The water's great today. The students backed away from the shore. To them, Jake appeared to be committing suicide in the most casual way possible. They watched as another wave, bigger than the first, crashed where he stood for a moment. White foam covered everything. Then Jake emerged, still laughing, water dripping from his clothes. That was a good one, maybe 4 feet. Pretty gentle for this time of year. Gentle Quilron-S lights flashed in panic patterns. That liquid force could crush our only if you don't know what you're doing, Jake said. Humans learn to read the water. We can tell which waves are safe and which ones to avoid. Watch. He pointed to the ocean. See how that wave is building? Look at the foam pattern. That one's going to be bigger, maybe 6 feet. But see how it's breaking far out? By the time it reaches shore, it'll be spent, safe to stand in. The students watched the wave approach exactly as Jake predicted. It crashed offshore, then rolled gently up the beach. Now that one. Jake pointed to another wave forming. That one's going to hit hard and fast. You'd want to dive under it or get out of the way. The ability to predict the behavior of violent water seemed impossible to the students. On their worlds, dangerous forces were avoided completely. Humans not only lived near them, but studied them well enough to safely interact with them. A woman jogged past them on the beach. She was moving fast, breathing hard, sweat covering her skin. Her face showed signs of exhaustion and effort. To the alien students, she appeared to be fleeing from some terrible threat. Should we help her? Asked a student whose species had strong protective instincts. Help her, what? Jake looked confused, then understood. Oh, she's not in trouble. She's exercising, running for fitness. The students watched the jogger disappear down the beach. She is deliberately exhausting herself. Sure, humans exercise to stay healthy. We stress our bodies so they get stronger. Running, lifting heavy things, swimming in rough water. It's all normal. This concept was completely alien to them. Their species maintained health through careful rest, proper nutrition, and avoiding any kind of physical stress. The idea of intentionally harming yourself to become stronger seemed insane. Does this not damage your body? Zixtel asked. A little, Jake said. Micro tears in muscles, stress on joints, elevated heart rate. But the body repairs itself stronger than before. It's called adaptation. 2 children ran past them, chasing each other and screaming with delight. They threw sand at each other, wrestled in the surf, and pushed each other into the waves. Their parents watched calmly from nearby chairs. The alien students were horrified. Young humans were engaging in what appeared to be combat, while their guardians ignored the violence. The small humans are attacking each other, observed a student whose species protected their young in isolation chambers. They're just playing, Jake said. Human children play rough. It teaches them coordination, social skills, and physical limits. Watch, nobody's actually getting hurt. Indeed, despite the apparent violence, both children were laughing. When one fell down, the other helped him up. When the game got too rough, they naturally calmed it down. Your species allows children to engage in combat training. It's not combat training. It's just fun. Though I guess it does teach useful skills. Balance, reflexes, how to fall safely, how to judge distance and timing. The students watched more human families enjoying the beach. Adults buried children in sand, then helped them dig out. Teenagers threw a ball back and forth, diving and jumping to catch it. An elderly man flew a kite, battling the wind to keep it airborne. Every activity seemed designed to challenge human bodies and minds. Nothing was safe or easy. Everything required skill, judgment, and physical ability. Jake led them to a nearby restaurant for lunch. The students expected processed nutrients or carefully prepared synthetic foods. Instead, Jake ordered something called sushi. The server brought a plate of raw fish arranged on rice. Jake picked up 2 sticks and used them to grab pieces of fish, which he put directly into his mouth. The students stared in shock. "You consume dead animal tissue?" asked Morthic, whose species absorbed nutrients from filtered water. "Sure," Jake said between bites. "This is tuna caught yesterday. Very fresh. Great source of protein and omega-3 fatty acids." Several students turned away as Jake continued eating. The idea of consuming the muscle tissue of other organisms was revolting to creatures who gained energy through photosynthesis or mineral absorption. "You kill other life forms for sustenance." "Well, something has to die for us to live," Jake said matter-of-factly. "That's how the food chain works. Plants eat sunlight and soil nutrients. Fish eat plants. Humans eat fish. Everything eats something else." The concept of a food chain based on death and consumption was terrifying to species that had evolved beyond such primitive needs. Yet humans seemed completely comfortable with it. After lunch, Jake suggested a walk on a nearby trail. "Nothing strenuous," he promised. "Just a gentle hike to get some exercise and see the local plants." The trail led up a hillside through what Jake called chaparral. The path was not smooth or level. Rocks, roots, and loose dirt made every step a challenge. The students struggled to maintain balance while Jake walked easily ahead. The sun beat down without any protective covering. On their world's, exposure to stellar radiation was carefully controlled. Here, humans walked under the open sky as if harmful rays were nothing to worry about. "Aren't you concerned about radiation exposure?" asked a student whose species lived underground to avoid their star's light. "We use sunscreen," Jake said, showing them a bottle of white liquid. "Plus, humans evolved under this sun. Our skin can handle reasonable exposure. Some sunlight is actually good for us, helps our bodies make vitamin D." The idea that stellar radiation could be beneficial seemed impossible, but Jake's casual attitude suggested this was just another everyday adaptation that humans took for granted. Halfway up the trail, they encountered a small snake sunning itself on a rock. It was no bigger than Jake's arm, harmless and sluggish in the heat. But to the alien students, it was a predator. 3 students immediately fainted. Others activated emergency signals. Quill-Run S-lights flashed in complex patterns that probably meant dangerous creature detected in his language. Jake looked at the tiny garter snake and chuckled. "Oh, that little guy. He's harmless, eats insects and small lizards. More afraid of us than we are of him." The snake, disturbed by the commotion, slithered away into the bushes. "Your world contains free-roaming predators?" asked the student who was still shaking. "Millions of them," Jake said. "Most are harmless to humans. We learn to live alongside them. Some are even helpful. They control pest populations." As they walked back down the trail, the students realized something troubling. Every single aspect of human daily life involved risk, challenge, or adaptation to dangerous conditions. From the moving air they breathed, to the water they drank, to the ground they walked on. Everything on this world was actively trying to test its inhabitants, and humans had not just survived these conditions. They had learned to thrive in them, to find joy in them, even to seek them out for recreation. By the time they returned to their hotel, the alien students were exhausted from what Jake had called a gentle introduction to Earth. They had witnessed humans playing in crushing water, intentionally stressing their bodies, eating dead animals, and casually coexisting with predators. On the 5th morning, Jake knocked on the students' hotel room doors earlier than usual. His face looked serious, but not worried. The students had learned that this expression meant something big was about to happen. "Change of plans today," he announced as they gathered in the hotel lobby. "We're going to stay inside for a while. There's a storm coming in from the Pacific." The alien students looked at each other with confusion. On their worlds, where it was either controlled by technology or so stable that it never changed, the concept of atmospheric conditions that could force changes to daily plans was completely foreign. "What is a storm?" asked Zixto, her crystal body already starting to chime with nervous energy. Jake walked to the large windows that faced the ocean. In the distance, they could see dark clouds building on the horizon. See those clouds? They're full of water and electrical energy. When they reach us, we'll get rain, wind, and lightning. Nothing too serious, just a typical Pacific storm. Morthic's large eyes widened in his water tank. Electrical energy in the atmosphere. Sure, water droplets rubbing against each other in the clouds build up static electricity. Eventually, it discharges as lightning. Pretty common here. The students stared at the approaching clouds with growing terror. Their home worlds had no weather systems. Rain was unknown. Lightning was something they had only read about in theoretical physics books. The idea that water would fall from the sky while electricity fired through the air seemed like a planetary disaster. How do humans survive such events? Asked Quilron, his lights flickering in distress patterns. We just wait it out, Jake said with a shrug. Modern buildings are safe. We have lightning rods, good drainage, and backup power systems. Most people just stay inside, maybe read a book or watch movies. The concept of treating a planetary electrical storm as a minor inconvenience was beyond their understanding. As the morning progressed, the clouds moved closer. The sky grew darker. The wind, which had seemed strange enough when it was gentle, began to increase in strength. Trees outside the hotel swayed back and forth. Loose papers and leaves flew through the air. The students pressed themselves against the windows, watching in fascination and terror as their temporary world prepared for what seemed like its own destruction. The plants are not secured, observed a student whose species carefully anchored every living thing to prevent movement. They're fine, Jake assured them. Trees and bushes are designed to bend with the wind. Rigid things break, flexible things survive. It's basic physics. The idea that living things could be designed to withstand violent forces was another shock. On their worlds, all life existed in protected environments where such stresses never occurred. The first drops of rain began to fall. The students watched in amazement as water actually descended from the sky, hitting the ground with tiny impacts. What started as scattered drops quickly became a steady shower, then a heavy downpour. Water is falling from the atmosphere, whispered one student in awe and terror. Happens all the time, Jake said casually. Water evaporates from the ocean, rises into the clouds, then falls back down as rain. It's how the water cycle works. Pretty efficient system, really. The students were pressed against the windows now, watching the impossible sight of water cascading from above. Puddles formed on the ground. Streams of water ran down streets and into drainage systems. The entire world outside seemed to be flooding. Your cities are submerging, Zixtel pointed out, her voice high with panic. Nah, just a little surface water. See those drains in the street? They carry the excess water away. Storm drains lead to the ocean. The city is designed to handle this. The wind grew stronger. They could hear it now, a constant sound like a living thing breathing heavily outside the building. Tree branches bent at impossible angles. Signs and awnings flapped wildly. Small objects tumbled down the street. The atmosphere is moving at dangerous velocities. Observed more. Type Jake checked his phone. Wind's about 30 miles per hour right now. Should peak around 40 or 45. Not too bad for a storm like this. To the students, wind at any speed was terrifying. Their worlds had still air that never moved. The concept of the entire atmosphere being in motion seemed like the end of everything. Then the lightning started. The first flash lit up the dark sky like a giant explosion. Several students screamed and dove for cover. A few seconds later, thunder rolled across the area, a deep rumbling sound that shook the building. The sky is exploding, gasped a student whose species communicated through subsonic vibrations that were now being overwhelmed by the thunder. Just electrical discharge, Jake explained calmly. Nothing to worry about. See how I counted the seconds between the flash and the thunder? That tells us how far away the lightning struck. This one was about 2 miles off. Another flash, brighter than the first, followed immediately by thunder so loud that the windows rattled. This time, Jake didn't have to count. That one was close, he admitted. Maybe a quarter mile. Good thing the hotel has lightning rods. The students huddled together in the center of the room, as far from the windows as possible. Outside, the storm was reaching its full power. Rain pounded against the glass. Wind howled around the building. Lightning flashed continuously, turning the dark afternoon into a strobing nightmare of light and shadow. The power went out. Emergency! Lighting clicked on immediately, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The students were sure this meant the end was near. Their civilizations would never tolerate infrastructure failures during atmospheric disasters. Jake pulled out his phone and turned on its flashlight. No big deal. Power outages are pretty common during storms. The electrical grid automatically shuts down some sections to prevent damage from lightning strikes. He walked to his backpack and pulled out several candles and a lighter. Soon warm, yellow light filled their area of the lobby. Other hotel guests had done the same thing. Everyone seemed calm and prepared. "You carry fire-making tools?" asked a student whose species had never mastered combustion. "Sure. Flashlights, candles, battery-powered radio, extra water, some snacks, basic storm supplies. Most people keep this stuff around during storm season." The idea that humans regularly prepared for planetary disasters as part of normal life was staggering. These people expected their world to try to kill them, and they planned accordingly as the storm raged. Outside, Jake showed them a weather app on his phone. Even though the power was out, cell towers were still working. The app displayed a colorful map showing the storm's movement, wind speeds, and lightning strikes in real time. "See the red and yellow areas? That's the heavy rain and wind. We're right here." He pointed to their location. "The storm should pass over us in about 2 hours, then move inland. Your species has mapped the planetary violence." Quillen's lights were flashing in patterns that meant deep confusion. "We've been tracking weather patterns for over a century. Satellites, radar, computer models. We can predict storms days in advance. Not perfect, but pretty accurate." The students realized that humans had not just learned to survive their hostile environment, they had studied it, mapped it, and developed technology to predict its behavior. This level of cooperation with planetary forces was beyond anything their species had achieved. Through the storm, they observed something even more remarkable. A woman in a rain jacket walked by outside, pulling a small dog on a leash. She moved carefully but purposefully through the wind and rain, making sure her animal companion had its daily exercise even during the atmospheric chaos. "A human is outside during the electrical bombardment," observed Morthic in disbelief. "Her dog needs to go out," Jake explained. "Can't wait for the storm to end." Dogs have needs, whether or no weather. The simple act of caring for another species during dangerous conditions represented something the students had never encountered. On their worlds, survival was an individual concern. The idea that humans would risk themselves for other creatures during planetary disasters showed a level of interspecies cooperation that challenged everything they understood about life on hostile worlds. As the evening wore on, the storm began to weaken. The lightning became less frequent. The wind died down from a howl to a whisper. The rain changed from a pounding assault to a gentle patter. Jake blew out the candles as the power came back on. "That wasn't too bad. Pretty typical storm for this time of year. Tomorrow should be clear and sunny." The students looked at each other in amazement. Jake spoke as if surviving an atmospheric electrical bombardment was just another evening's entertainment. For him, it apparently was. "This happens regularly?" asked Zixtel. "Oh, sure. Storm season runs from October through March. We might get 6 or 8 storms like this each winter. Some years we get bigger ones, real wind and rain. Those are fun." The students were beginning to understand that their initial assessment had been completely wrong. Earth was not just a death world that had accidentally produced intelligent life. Earth was a training ground that created the most adaptable, resilient, and cooperative species the galaxy had ever seen. And the humans who lived here thought violent electrical storms were fun as they settled in for the night. Listening to the last gentle sounds of rain against their windows, the alien students realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. The morning after the storm brought bright sunshine and clear skies, Jake seemed extra cheerful as he led the students outside. The air smelled clean and fresh, Puddles reflected the blue sky, and everything looked washed and new. "Storm's gone," Jake announced. "Perfect day to meet some neighbors. I want you to see how regular humans live and work." The students followed nervously. After yesterday's atmospheric violence, they were not sure what else this planet might throw at them. But Jake walked confidently down the street, greeting other humans who were already busy cleaning up after the storm. Their first stop was the house next door. A woman was in her front yard, picking up fallen tree branches and putting them in a pile. She had dark hair tied back and wore simple work clothes. When she saw Jake approaching with his unusual group, she smiled and waved. "Hey, Jake," she called. "How did your alien friends handle their first storm?" "They did great," Jake replied. "Everyone, this is my neighbor, Lisa Chen. She's a doctor at the local hospital." Lisa wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to meet them. The students noticed small scars on her hands and arms. Her movements were quick and precise, like someone used to working under pressure. A doctor asked Zixdale, "You repaired damaged humans?" "That's right," Lisa said with a smile. "I'm a trauma surgeon. When people get hurt badly, they bring them to me, and I fix them up." The students exchanged worried looks. The idea that humans got hurt so often that they needed specialists to repair them was disturbing. On their worlds, injury was so rare that most species had never developed advanced medical techniques. "What kinds of damage do you repair?" asked Morthic from his water tank. Lisa sat down on her front steps, making herself less intimidating to the smaller aliens. "All sorts of things. Car accidents, sports injuries, falls from high places, cuts from sharp tools, burns from hot surfaces. Sometimes people come in who were attacked by wild animals." Each item on her list made the students more horrified. Humans regularly engaged in activities that could result in serious bodily harm, and they did these things so often that they had built entire institutions to deal with the consequences. "Do humans not try to avoid these dangers?" asked Quilron, his lights flickering with confusion. "We try to be careful," Lisa explained. "But life is risky. People have to drive to work, play sports to stay healthy, use tools to build things, cook food over heat sources. Sometimes accidents happen. That's just part of living." She pointed to a scar on her forearm. "I got this one rock climbing last year. Fell about 15 feet when my rope anchor came loose. Broke my arm in 2 places. Had to have surgery to put the bones back together." "You deliberately climbed a vertical rock surface for recreation." Zixto's crystal body was chiming. "With distress? Sure. Great exercise. Beautiful views. Mental challenge. I go climbing almost every weekend." Lisa seemed genuinely puzzled by their reaction. "Don't your species have dangerous hobbies?" The students looked at each other. Their hobbies included meditation, mathematical puzzles, and carefully controlled artistic expression. The idea of seeking out physical danger for fun was completely alien to them. Lisa glanced at her watch. "I need to get to work soon. Today's my turn in the emergency room. Never know what's going to come through those doors." "You work during unpredictable, dangerous situations?" asked a student whose species planned every activity weeks in advance. "That's the job," Lisa said with a shrug. "Last week, I had a guy who got stung by a jellyfish, a woman who fell off her bicycle, and 3 teenagers who tried to cook dinner but started a kitchen fire instead. You just deal with whatever shows up." As Lisa gathered her things for work, Jake led the students down the street to meet another neighbor. Carlos Rodriguez was in his driveway, loading tools into a large truck. He was a big man with muscled arms and hands that looked like they had done hard work for many years. "Carlos builds things," Jake explained. "Houses, office buildings, bridges, construction work." Carlos wiped grease off his hands with a dirty cloth and nodded to the group. "Morning, Jake. These the visitors from space?" "That's right. They're learning about human life on Earth." Carlos looked at the aliens with friendly curiosity. "What do you want to know about construction?" The students had many questions, but Zixtel spoke first. "You create structures that can withstand this planet's violent conditions." "You bet," Carlos said proudly. "Everything I build has to handle earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and decades of weather. California building codes are pretty strict." The word earthquakes made several students step backward. "The ground moves on this planet." "Oh yeah, We're sitting right on top of several major fault lines. The whole West Coast gets regular earthquakes. Most are small, just little shakes. But every few years, we get a big one that can knock down buildings if they're not built right. Carlos showed them his truck loaded with power tools, steel beams, and safety equipment. That's why we use flexible foundations, steel reinforcement, and shock absorbers in tall buildings. Got to let the structure move with the earthquake instead of fighting it. The idea that humans built their cities on unstable ground that could move without warning was terrifying. But what was more terrifying was that they had learned to build structures that could survive such conditions. Is this not extremely dangerous work? Asked more single quotes. THEK. Carlos pointed to scars on his arms and a crooked finger that had clearly been broken at some point. Construction's always risky. I've been hurt plenty of times. Fell off a roof when I was 22. Got my hand crushed by a beam last year. Had a nail gun misfire and put a nail through my boot. Despite listing these injuries, Carlos seemed completely calm about them. But I wear safety gear, follow proper procedures, and work with experienced crews. Good planning reduces the risks, and I love the work seeing a building go up from nothing, knowing it'll protect families for generations. The students were beginning to understand something important about humans. They did not avoid danger. Instead, they studied it, planned for it, and found ways to work alongside it safely. Their next stop was the local elementary school. The principal, Nancy White, gave them a tour of classrooms where young humans were learning basic survival skills, disguised as education. This is our fire safety demonstration, she explained as they watched 6-year-old children practice. Stop, drop, and roll. We teach this to every student. If their clothes catch fire, they know how to put it out. The alien students watched in amazement as human children cheerfully practiced emergency procedures that would be needed only on the most dangerous worlds. The children seemed to enjoy the lessons, turning survival training into games. In another classroom, students were learning to identify poisonous plants. Pictures of dangerous flora covered the walls. Children raised their hands excitedly to name plants that could make them sick or kill them. Poison oak makes you itchy, called out one 7-year-old. But poison hemlock can stop your breathing. The casual way these young humans discussed lethal vegetation shocked the alien observers. On their worlds, such dangerous organisms simply did not exist. Here, children learned to recognize and avoid them as part of basic education at the school's swimming pool. Older children were learning water safety. The instructor threw weighted objects into the deep end, and students dove down to retrieve them while holding their breath. This teaches them how to save someone who's drowning. The instructor explained, every child in California learns basic water rescue techniques. The fact that humans consider drowning common enough to require universal training disturbed the students greatly, but they were also impressed by the systematic way humans prepared their young for planetary dangers. During recess, they observed children playing on equipment that would be banned on any civilized world. Swings that launched them high into the air, slides that created dangerous speeds, climbing structures that encouraged falls from significant heights. Your young ones trained for combat through recreational activities, asked a student whose species raised children in padded isolation chambers. They're just having fun, Nancy explained. But yes, playground activities do help children develop balance, coordination, risk assessment, and physical strength. They learn to judge distances, calculate momentum, and recover from falls. A child ran past them, chasing a ball. He tripped on uneven ground, rolled expertly, and jumped back to his feet without breaking stride. To him, it was nothing. To the alien students, it was an impressive display of physical adaptation and recovery skills. As they watched, more children demonstrated abilities that seemed superhuman to species from stable worlds. Climbing trees with ease, balancing on narrow beams, throwing and catching objects with precision, playing games that required split-second timing and spatial awareness. Human children are trained athletes, observed Quilron. Not trained, Nancy corrected. Just allowed to be children. We let them run, climb, fall, and figure things out. Their bodies and minds naturally develop the skills they need. The afternoon ended at the local high school, where they witnessed the most shocking sight yet. Teenage humans engaged in organized combat while thousands of spectators cheered. Jake explained that it was called football. Two teams of heavily armored adolescents crashed into each other repeatedly, fighting for control of an oval ball. On their final day, Jake had one more person he wanted the students to meet. He drove them to a small house with a neat garden and white painted walls. An elderly human sat on the front porch in a wooden chair, reading a newspaper. "That's my grandfather," Jake said as they got out of the car. "Pete Johnson. He's 89 years old." The students looked at the old human with curiosity. On their worlds, reaching such an advanced age was rare. Their species lived in carefully controlled environments where aging was slowed by perfect conditions. To survive almost 90 years on a death world seemed impossible. Pete looked up from his newspaper as they approached. His face was lined with wrinkles, and his hair was completely white. His hands showed spots and scars from decades of use. But his eyes were bright and alert, and he smiled warmly at his visitors. "So these are the alien students Jake told me about," Pete said in a voice that was still strong despite his age. "Welcome to Earth, kids. Hope you're enjoying your visit." The students gathered around the porch while Jake brought chairs from inside the house. Pete seemed genuinely happy to have company, especially visitors from other worlds. "Jake says you want to learn about human life," Pete continued. "Well, I've been living it longer than most. Born in 1936, right here in California, seen a lot of changes in my time." Zixtel spoke first. "You have survived on this planet for 18.9 standard Earth years." "Sure have," Pete chuckled. "The Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, and more natural disasters than I can count. This old planet's tried to kill me plenty of times, but I'm still here." The casual way he mentioned surviving a world war shocked the students. Their species had achieved peace millennia ago. The idea that humans had fought global conflicts within living memory was disturbing. "You participated in warfare between human groups?" asked Quilran, his lights flickering with confusion. Pete's expression grew more serious. "I was 18 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Enlisted in the Navy right away. Spent 3 years in the Pacific Theater, fighting the Japanese. Lost a lot of good friends out there." He rolled up his sleeve to show a faded tattoo of an anchor and the name of a ship. "USS California. She was sunk at Pearl Harbor. Raised her up and fixed her. I served on her when she went back to war. Tough old ship." The students listened as Pete described battles at sea, friends who never came home, and living for months on a metal ship surrounded by endless dangerous water. To them, it sounded like deliberate torture. To Pete, it was just what young men did when their country needed them. "Were you not afraid?" asked Morthic. "Scared? Hell yes, I was scared." Pete laughed. "Any man who says he wasn't scared in combat is either lying or crazy. But being scared doesn't mean you quit. You do your job, you look out for your buddies, and you keep going." Pete stood up slowly and walked to his garden. The students followed, watching as he knelt down beside a row of tomato plants. His movements were careful but sure, despite his age. "After the war, I came home and married my sweetheart, Mary," he continued, gently checking the soil around the plants. "We bought this house in 1949, raised 4 kids here. Mary passed away 5 years ago, but I still keep her garden going." The students watched as Pete tended the plants with obvious love and care. His hands, scarred from decades of work and war, were gentle with the delicate tomato vines. "These plants don't look like they're in protective enclosures," observed a student whose species grew food in sterile chambers. "Nope, they grow right here in the dirt, under the open sky," Pete said. "Have to watch out for pests, diseases, and weather changes. But that's what makes gardening interesting. You work with nature, not against it." A small bird landed nearby and began searching for insects among the plants. Pete smiled and continued working, not bothered by the wild creature sharing his space. "You allow uncontrolled biological organisms in your food production area?" asked Zixtel. "That little guy's a sparrow. He eats the bugs that would damage my tomatoes. We help each other out." Pete scattered some breadcrumbs on the ground, and more birds came to feed. Everything's connected here. Birds, bugs, plants, soil, weather. You learn to work with the whole system. As they sat in the garden, Pete told them stories of his long life. He described working in a steel factory during the 1950s where temperatures reached dangerous levels and accidents were common. He talked about raising children during the Cold War when nuclear destruction seemed possible at any moment. He remembered natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, and fires that had threatened his community over the decades. In 1994, we had the Northridge earthquake, Pete said. Whole house shook like it was going to fall down. Pictures fell off the walls, dishes broke, water pipes burst, but we cleaned up, fixed what was broken, and kept going. That's what you do. The students realize that Pete's entire life had been a series of challenges that would be considered catastrophic on their worlds. War, industrial accidents, natural disasters, the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Yet he spoke of these experiences as normal parts of human existence. How did you maintain sanity during such constant dangers? Asked a student whose species required absolute stability for mental health. Pete looked surprised by the question. Dangerous? I suppose it was, looking back. But you don't think about it that way when you're living it. You just focus on what needs to be done. Take care of your family. Do your job. Help your neighbors. Life's too short to spend it worrying about things you can't control. Jake had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Grandpa, tell them about the time you saved the neighborhood during the fire. Pete waved his hand dismissively. That wasn't anything special. Just did what needed doing. But Jake insisted, and Pete finally told the story. In 1993, wildfires had threatened their community. While many people evacuated, Pete stayed behind to help elderly neighbors who couldn't leave easily. He spent 2 days fighting spot fires with a garden hose, evacuating people in his truck, and coordinating with firefighters. The fire came within half a mile of this house, Pete said. Sky was orange for 3 days, ash falling like snow. But the firefighters got it under control, and we all made it through fine. The casual way he described battling a massive wildfire stunned the students. On their worlds, such a disaster would require evacuation of entire continents. Pete had treated it as a neighborhood problem to be solved. As the afternoon wore on, more stories emerged. Pete had survived the 1989 earthquake, multiple economic recessions, several serious illnesses, and the loss of many friends and family members. Each challenge had made him stronger and more resilient rather than breaking him down. The secret, Pete said, as the sun began to set, is not to fight against life's difficulties. You learn to bend with them, like those trees during the storm. The other day, rigid things break, flexible things survive. He pointed to an old oak tree in his yard. That tree's been here longer than I have. It's been through fires, floods, earthquakes, and droughts. Still growing strong because it knows how to adapt. Jake looked at his alien students, who had been quiet for a long time. Do you understand now why Earth is classified as a Deathworld? Zixtal spoke slowly, her crystal body humming with new understanding. It is not because your planet is more dangerous than others, although it is. It is because living here creates beings like Pete Johnson. Exactly, Jake said. Every other species that achieved space travel did it by mastering their environment, controlling it, making it safe. Humans achieved space travel while still living in full partnership with a world that demands excellence just to survive. Pete chuckled. You kids went to the moon not because you had to, but because it looked interesting. That's right, Jake confirmed. We explore space not to escape Earth, but because we're curious about what else is out there. Earth taught us to find joy in challenges, to work together during crises, and to keep going no matter what happens. Morthic floated closer to Pete's chair. Your species seeks out difficulty deliberately. I suppose we do, Pete agreed. Mary used to say I couldn't sit still if my life depended on it. Always had to have some project going, some problem to solve. Guess that's just human nature. As darkness fell, Jake prepared to take the students back to their hotel. They would leave Earth tomorrow, returning to their safe, predictable worlds with a new understanding of humanity. Pete shook hands with each student, his grip still firm despite his age. You folks come back anytime. Always room at the table. For friends, walking back to the car, the students were unusually quiet. Finally, Quillen spoke what they were all thinking. We understand now why humans are the galaxy's most effective soldiers, explorers, and emergency responders. You are not trained for these roles. You are raised for them by your planet itself. Jake nodded. Earth doesn't just produce humans who can survive in space. It produces humans who thrive in impossible conditions, who solve problems under pressure, and who never give up, no matter how bad things get. As they drove through the city, the students saw the evidence everywhere. Humans going about their evening routines, unaware that they were performing feats of adaptation and resilience that amazed the galaxy. Children playing in parks that would be considered training grounds for elite soldiers on other worlds.